I stood in the hallway of the Denver courthouse, my hands trembling as I held the manila envelope that had just been delivered. Inside was a foreclosure notice for the Sterling Mansion on Maple Hollow Street, the same mansion where I had spent 23 years feeling invisible. The same day, my phone buzzed with an email notification. My sustainable housing design had been selected for publication in Sustainable Architecture Quarterly, and construction would begin next month. I stared at both pieces of paper, one representing the complete collapse of everything my father had built on lies, the other symbolizing the beginning of everything I had built on my own truth. The symmetry was almost poetic, almost sweet. But before I tell you how I got here, before I explain how a girl who once couldn't speak up at the dinner table became the woman who brought down an empire of deceit, I need you to understand where this all began. If you're watching this because you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered why you're the one always sacrificing while others take everything, hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories of people who found their voice when they thought they had lost everything. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever discovered a betrayal so deep it changed everything you thought you knew about your family? Because that's exactly what happened to me. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really started. It was Christmas Eve, and snow was falling thick and heavy over the Sterling Mansion in the suburbs. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Twinkling lights adorned every window, wreaths hung on double doors, and luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Inside, the house smelled of roasted duck and expensive wine. Crystal chandeliers bathed everything in golden light. The perfect holiday card scene. I knew what it really was, a beautiful shell hiding something rotten inside. I arrived late that evening, pulling up in my 10-year-old Honda Civic that looked embarrassingly out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs. In my hands, I carried a small wooden box, intricately carved with geometric patterns. I had spent 3 months designing and crafting it myself, working late into the night after my shifts at the diner where I waitressed to pay my bills. Inside the box were architectural sketches I had drawn, each one representing a different member of the family. It was thoughtful, it was personal, it was made with love. I should have known it wouldn't matter. The moment I walked through those doors, I felt it, that familiar chill of being tolerated rather than welcomed. My stepmother Vivian glided past me in a designer dress that probably cost more than my entire semester's tuition, her perfume overwhelming as she air-kissed near my cheek without actually touching me. My father, Richard, barely glanced up from his conversation with business associates. And then there was Chloe, my 16-year-old half-sister, draped across the velvet sofa in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her newly manicured nails clicking against the screen. She wore a necklace I recognized from Tiffany's. It cost at least $5,000. I knew because I had looked at it once in a window display and laughed at the absurdity of spending that much on jewelry. The only person who smiled when they saw me was my grandfather, Arthur Sterling. He was 82 years old, sharp as a knife, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He stood from his chair and wrapped me in a genuine hug, the first real physical contact I'd had with anyone in that house in months. We gathered in the dining room, a space so grand it could seat 20 people comfortably. Tonight, it was just the 6 of us, my father, Vivian, Chloe, my grandfather, an aunt who lived 3 states away and only showed up for major holidays, and me. I took my usual seat at the far end of the table, the one closest to the kitchen, the one that made it easy for me to be forgotten. Dinner progressed with the usual superficial conversation. Vivian talked about her upcoming spa retreat in Sedona. Chloe complained about her private school teachers being too demanding. My father discussed a new development project. I stayed quiet, pushing roasted vegetables around my plate, waiting for the evening to end so I could drive back to my tiny studio apartment and finally breathe. That's when my grandfather spoke up, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Aurora, sweetheart, did you enjoy the house I bought for you? The one on Sycamore Street? $480,000. Quite the investment. I hope it's treating you well." The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people pausing to listen, but the suffocating silence of a bomb that had just been dropped. I felt every eye turn toward me. Fork tines scraped against fine china. Someone's wine glass clinked as it was set down too hard. I stared at my grandfather, confusion flooding through me. "I'm sorry, what house?" The words came out barely above a whisper. My grandfather's face changed immediately. His warm smile faded, replaced by the sharp, calculating expression I had seen him use in business negotiations. His gaze swept across the table, landing on my father and Vivian. "The house on Sycamore Street, the one I purchased for you 18 months ago. The one I made sure was put in your name." My father's face had gone pale. Vivian's perfectly applied lipstick seemed garish against her suddenly bloodless complexion. I watched as my father cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Dad, that's a bit complicated. You see, Aurora was busy with school, and we thought it would be better if we managed the property for her temporarily, just until she graduated and could handle the responsibilities of homeownership. Temporarily." My grandfather repeated the words slowly, each syllable dripping with skepticism. 18 months is quite temporary, Richard." Vivian jumped in, her voice taking on that wounded tone she always used when she wanted sympathy. "Arthur, you have to understand. We were only trying to help. Aurora had so much on her plate with her studies and her part-time job. We didn't want to burden her with property taxes and maintenance issues." I sat frozen in my chair, my mind racing. A house. My grandfather had bought me a house. $480,000. And I had never known about it. I had spent the last year and a half eating ramen noodles for dinner, working double shifts at the diner, taking out student loans to cover my tuition and rent, while somewhere in this city there was a house that was supposed to be mine. "Where is this house?" I heard myself ask. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and cold. My father attempted a laugh that came out more like a cough. "Aurora, let's not make this uncomfortable. This is a family gathering. We can discuss the details later." "Where is the house?" I repeated, each word deliberate. My grandfather pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen despite his age. 427 Sycamore Street. According to the county records, the deed is currently registered to Vivian Sterling, transferred from Aurora Hayes approximately 14 months ago. Vivian's name, not mine. My stepmother had stolen a house my grandfather bought for me. Her face shifted from fake concern to raw panic. My father's jaw clenched so tight I could see every muscle. Even Chloe looked genuinely confused. "You forged my signature." The realization hit me like ice water. "You took my house and you forged my signature to transfer it." "That's a very serious accusation," my father said sharply, "and completely unfounded. We had your verbal permission." "I never gave you permission because I never knew the house existed." My voice had risen now, echoing off the high ceilings. The carved wooden box I had brought sat forgotten on the side table near the entrance, wrapped in simple brown paper, already irrelevant. My grandfather stood, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Richard, I think it's time you and I had a conversation in private, now." But my father was already in damage control mode. "Dad, you're being unreasonable. We've been managing Aurora's assets for her benefit. The rental income from that property has been going into a fund for her future." "What rental income?" My grandfather's voice could have frozen hell itself. "The house has been vacant for 14 months, according to the utility records. Or were you planning on telling me another convenient lie?" Vivian stood abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. "I don't have to sit here and be accused of crimes I didn't commit. We've done nothing but support Aurora her entire life." "Support me?" I found myself standing too, my hands pressed flat against the table. "You took a house that was meant for me and put it in your name. What else have you taken?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. My grandfather's eyes narrowed. That's an excellent question, Aurora. I think it's time we found out the answer. Get your coat. You're coming with me to Denver. She's not going anywhere, my father tried to assert, but there was a tremor in his voice now, the sound of a man who knew his carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. Actually, I am. I was surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I walked past the table, past the uneaten desserts and the opened wine bottles, past the family photos on the walls where I noticed for the first time how few of them actually included me. I grabbed my coat from the rack near the door, picked up my wooden box that no one had bothered to open, and walked out into the snowy night with my grandfather. I didn't look back. Not once. As we drove away from that house with its perfect lights and its rotten core, I felt something shift inside me. The girl who had arrived that evening hoping for crumbs of affection was gone. In her place was someone angrier, someone clearer, someone who was done being invisible. The drive to Denver took 4 hours through the snow. My grandfather didn't say much, but the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people preparing for battle. He made phone calls, his voice clipped and professional, speaking to lawyers and accountants, pulling records, demanding documents. By the time we arrived at his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, dawn was breaking, and I was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "Get some sleep," he told me, showing me to a guest room that was bigger than my entire studio apartment. "Tomorrow, we start uncovering the truth." But I couldn't sleep. I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of my childhood and young adult life through this new, horrifying lens. Every time I had needed money and been told the family was going through a rough patch. Every time I had worked late nights to pay for textbooks while Chloe got a new car for her 16th birthday. Every time Vivian had remodeled another room of the house while I wore secondhand clothes from thrift stores. The next morning, my grandfather and I sat in his home office, surrounded by documents spread across a massive oak desk. He had called in his personal attorney, a woman named Morgan Thorne who had the kind of sharp, no-nonsense demeanor that made me feel safer just being in the same room as her. And that's when the real nightmare began. The first document Morgan showed me was a bank transfer, clear as day. $480,000 transferred from Arthur Sterling to Richard Sterling with a memo that read, "House purchase for Aurora Hayes, Sycamore Street property." The date was 18 months ago. The second document was an email chain, messages sent from my email address to my father's, agreeing to the property transfer, discussing management arrangements, thanking him for handling everything. Except I had never sent those emails. I checked my own account, my hands shaking as I scrolled through old messages. Nothing. These emails had never existed in my inbox. They had been fabricated, created using my email address but never actually sent from my account. The third document made me feel physically sick. It was a deed transfer, signed with my signature, dated 14 months ago, moving the property from my name to Vivian's. I stared at the signature, my own name written in handwriting that was similar to mine but not quite right. The loops were too perfect. The pressure was too even. Someone had practiced forging my signature well enough to fool the county recorder's office, but not well enough to fool me. "That's identity theft?" Morgan said flatly. "And fraud. Multiple felonies." But Morgan wasn't done. She pulled out another folder, this one significantly thicker. "Your grandfather also asked me to look into the trust fund he established for you when you were born. Aurora, you need to prepare yourself for this." The trust fund. I had vague memories of my grandfather mentioning it when I was younger, saying it was for my education and my future. I had assumed it was a small amount, maybe enough for a semester or two of college. I had never asked about it because my father had always told me it was being managed, and I would have access to it when I was older. Morgan opened the folder. The original balance was $400,000, established when you were born. It was meant to be untouched until you turned 21. At that point, you should have had full access. You're now 23. Should have had, I repeated numbly. What's in it now? $17,000. The room spun. What? Morgan's voice was gentle but firm. There have been systematic withdrawals over the past 4 years, large transfers for something labeled as educational expenses. I have the records here. $50,000 paid to Westbridge Preparatory Academy. That's where Chloe goes to school, correct? I nodded, unable to speak. $75,000 to a luxury travel agency. Multiple trips to Europe, the Caribbean, Dubai. The travel dates correspond with social media posts from Vivian Sterling's Instagram account. $80,000 to various luxury retailers, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Hermes. Another $60,000 to a general contractor for home renovations. According to the invoice descriptions, that was for remodeling the master bathroom in the Sterling residence. They spent my mother's money. The words came out broken. My real mother. She died when I was 7. My grandfather said she had left money for me. $42,000 from your mother's life insurance policy. My grandfather confirmed, his voice thick with barely controlled rage. I had it placed in the trust fund to keep it safe. To keep it for you. Your father was appointed as the trustee when you were still a minor. He had a legal obligation to use that money solely for your benefit. There's more, Morgan said, and I didn't think I could handle more, but she continued anyway. There's a credit card in your name. The balance is $23,000. The charges, designer clothes in sizes that don't match your measurements, jewelry, spa treatments, restaurant bills at places you've never been to, your credit score has been destroyed. I couldn't breathe. The room was too small, too hot, too suffocating. I stumbled to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass, looking out at the Denver skyline. 23 years. 23 years I had believed I was the problem. That I wasn't good enough, wasn't pretty enough, wasn't successful enough to deserve their love. 23 years I had worked myself to exhaustion, believing I had to earn my place in that family through sacrifice and silence. And all along, they had been robbing me blind. I want to see it all, I heard myself say. Every transaction, every forged document, every lie, I want to see all of it. So we went through it. Every single page, every bank statement, every credit card charge, every fraudulent signature. My father had taken money meant for my college tuition and used it to fund Chloe's private school education. Vivian had used money from my trust fund to buy the designer wardrobe that hung in her walk-in closet. They had lived a life of luxury on money that was supposed to build my future, and they had done it while watching me struggle to pay for gas to get to work. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, and as I sat there in my grandfather's office, surrounded by proof of my family's betrayal, something inside me hardened. I thought about that carved wooden box still sitting in the trunk of my car, about the hours I had spent trying to create something meaningful for people who had never seen me as anything more than a resource to be exploited. I'm not letting this go, I said, looking up at Morgan and my grandfather. I want to press charges. I want to sue them for every penny they stole, and I don't care if it destroys them. Morgan smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. Good, because I've already started drafting the complaint. My grandfather placed a weathered hand on my shoulder. You'll need somewhere to stay while this plays out. You're welcome here as long as you need. And Aurora, there's something else. I know you were planning to finish your architecture degree. I'd like to cover your tuition. Not as a loan, but as an investment. I've seen your work. You're brilliant. You deserve a chance to pursue your dreams without drowning in debt. I wanted to refuse. Pride and years of forced independence made me want to say I could handle it myself. But I was tired, so tired. And for once, someone was offering help without strings attached, without hidden agendas, without expecting me to earn love through suffering. Thank you, I whispered, and meant it. The next week was a blur of legal action. Morgan moved with the efficiency of a predator that had scented blood. We filed a police report detailing the identity theft, the fraudulent signatures, the misappropriation of trust funds. We froze my credit to prevent further damage. We submitted complaint after complaint, each one backed by irrefutable evidence. The house on Sycamore Street, which I had never even seen, became the centerpiece of a massive fraud case. Morgan also discovered that my father had been using my name and social security number to open additional credit lines, destroying my financial identity before I had even had a chance to build one. My phone started ringing within 24 hours of filing the police report. First, it was my father, his voice alternating between rage and desperate pleading. "Aurora, what are you doing? You're destroying this family. Everything I did was for your own good. You were too young to understand financial management. I was protecting you." Protecting me. The lie was so audacious I almost laughed. I hung up without responding and blocked his number. Then came Vivian, her voice dripping with fake tears. "How could you do this to us, after everything we've done for you? I raised you like my own daughter. Is this how you repay kindness?" Raised me like her own daughter. She had raised Chloe with designer clothes and European vacations while I wore thrift store jeans and worked double shifts to afford rent. I blocked her number too. Chloe sent a barrage of text messages, each one more hysterical than the last. "Aurora, why are you being so mean to Mom and Dad? They said you're trying to get them arrested? What's wrong with you? Do you hate our family that much? Also, they cut my allowance and now I can't buy the new iPhone and it's your fault." I stared at that last message for a long moment, wondering if Chloe genuinely didn't understand what her parents had done or if she had simply been raised to believe that my suffering was the acceptable cost of her comfort. Either way, I blocked her too. But they didn't stop there. When the direct approach failed, they went public. Vivian posted on her social media carefully worded messages about ungrateful children and elder abuse and family betrayal. She didn't name me directly, but anyone who knew us would understand who she meant. She posted photos of my father looking haggard and stressed, with captions about false accusations and legal harassment. The comments section filled with sympathy from people who didn't know the truth. Friends and acquaintances of the family who saw only the carefully curated image of the perfect Sterlings, now under attack from a vindictive daughter. Chloe was even worse. She posted videos of herself crying, talking about how her evil sister was trying to destroy the family, how her parents were the most loving people in the world, how she didn't understand why I would lie about them like this. Her comment sections exploded with support from her private school. Friends, teenagers who knew nothing about financial abuse or identity theft, but plenty about dramatic social media narratives. I watched this digital assault from the relative safety of my grandfather's penthouse, each notification a small knife wound. Morgan advised me not to engage, not to try to defend myself publicly. "The court of public opinion doesn't matter," she said. "The actual court does, and we have every bit of evidence we need." But it hurt. Of course it hurt. Watching people I had known for years, family, friends, and distant relatives, line up to defend my abusers while painting me as the villain. Some tried to reach out to me directly, concerned messages asking if I was okay, if I needed help, subtly implying that maybe I had misunderstood the situation, that maybe I should reconsider destroying my family over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. As if nearly $400,000 in stolen money was something that could be chalked up to a simple mistake. My grandfather had his own response to the social media campaign. He didn't post dramatic messages or crying videos. Instead, he made a single phone call to Richard, one that I overheard from the next room. "Richard, this is your only warning. Every business contract you have with Sterling Development is terminated effective immediately. Every professional connection you've leveraged through my name is done. If you and Vivian continue this harassment campaign against Aurora, I will personally ensure that every business associate, every client, every contractor in this city knows exactly what you've done. I will make it my mission to see that you never work in real estate again. Am I clear?" There was a long pause, then my grandfather's voice, colder than I had ever heard it. Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become. He hung up. For a moment, he stood with his back to me, his shoulders tight with anger. Then he turned, and his expression softened when he saw me. They're going to get nastier before this is over. Are you prepared for that? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was prepared at all. I was prepared to fight. Yes, prepared to stand my ground. But prepared for the full weight of their desperation and malice? No one could really be prepared for that. I was right to worry. 3 days later, my father showed up at the University of Denver campus where I had recently enrolled for the spring semester. He found me outside the architecture building, surrounded by my new classmates, discussing a design project. His arrival was loud and deliberately dramatic. "Aurora!" he shouted across the courtyard, causing dozens of heads to turn. "Aurora Hayes, I need to speak with you immediately." I froze, recognizing his voice instantly. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, to avoid the confrontation. But I had spent 23 years running and hiding and avoiding. That version of me was gone, burned away by betrayal and rebuilt with something harder. I turned to face him. "You need to leave." He strode across the courtyard, his face red, his movements aggressive. Students backed away, sensing the tension. "You will not destroy this family with your lies. I am your father, and I demand respect." "You're my biological father," I corrected, my voice steady despite the way my heart was hammering. "But you stopped being my dad the moment you started stealing from me. I was invisible to you for 23 years. Now suddenly you demand respect? It doesn't work that way." He moved closer, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to physically intimidate me. But before he could, a campus security officer appeared, alerted by concerned students. "Sir, I'm going to need you to leave campus property immediately." "This is my daughter," my father protested. "I have a right to speak to her." "Not when there's a restraining order filed against you. You don't," the security officer replied, and I saw my father's face go pale. Morgan had been busy. "Campus security has been notified. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to call the police." My father looked at me, and in that moment, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. He was afraid of me, of what I could do, of the power I had reclaimed. "You're going to regret this, Aurora. Family is everything, and you've chosen to betray yours." "No," I said quietly. "You betrayed me, every single day of my life. I'm just finally done pretending it didn't happen." He left, escorted by campus security, and I stood there in the courtyard surrounded by curious students and concerned classmates. One of them, a guy named Evan Roberts, who sat next to me in design studio, approached carefully. "Hey, are you okay?" That looked intense. "I'm okay," I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. Yes, my hands were shaking. Yes, I was embarrassed that my family drama had just played out in front of my peers. But I was okay. Because I had stood my ground, I had spoken my truth, and I had watched my father, the man who had controlled so much of my life through his neglect and theft, walk away defeated. Professor David Jenkins, who headed the architecture department, caught up with me as I was heading to class. He was a kind man in his 60s, someone who had already taken an interest in my work. "Miss Hayes, I saw what happened. I want you to know that the university takes student safety very seriously. If you need any additional support or accommodations while this is being resolved, my door is always open." "Thank you, Professor." He smiled, a genuine expression of warmth. "I reviewed your admission portfolio this morning. Your designs are exceptional, Aurora. There's a depth to them, an understanding of space and boundaries that goes beyond technical skill. I have a feeling you're going to do remarkable things in this field." Those words stayed with me through the rest of that difficult day. Someone saw my potential. Someone recognized my worth, and that someone wasn't trying to exploit it for their own gain. The following weeks brought more challenges. Vivian escalated her social media campaign. reaching out to local news outlets with a carefully crafted story about elder abuse and financial manipulation, painting my grandfather as a senile old man being controlled by his vindictive granddaughter. One local station actually ran a segment, though they were careful to present it as allegations rather than facts. Morgan immediately sent a cease and desist letter threatening a defamation lawsuit, and the story quietly disappeared from their website. But the damage was done. Suddenly, people were looking at me differently. Whispers followed me through campus. Isn't she the one who's suing her family? I heard she's trying to get her dad arrested. She seems so normal, but apparently she's pretty cold-blooded. It was Evan who really stood by me during this time. We had become friends through our architecture classes, bonding over late-night design sessions, and shared frustration with difficult assignments. When the whispers got louder, when other students started avoiding me because they didn't want to be associated with family drama, Evan remained steady. "People are idiots," he said bluntly one afternoon as we worked on a model for our sustainable housing project. "They're judging you without knowing anything about what actually happened. And you know what? That says more about them than it does about you." "I just wish I could explain," I admitted. "Every time I see those posts from Vivian, every time I hear someone say I'm being ungrateful, I want to scream the truth." "Then tell it," Evan suggested. "Not on social media, that's just a circus. But if people ask you directly, tell them the truth. Let them decide what to believe." So I started doing that. When a classmate cautiously asked me about the situation, instead of deflecting or staying silent, I said simply, "My father stole nearly $400,000 from me, including money my mother left me after she died. He forged my signature and committed identity theft. I filed charges because what he did was illegal and wrong." The classmate had stared at me, shocked, then quietly said, "Oh my God. I'm so sorry." Word spread quickly after that. The whispers didn't stop, but they changed. Instead of, "She's heartless," I started hearing, "Holy shit, can you imagine?" Meanwhile, the legal case was progressing. Morgan had filed multiple complaints, civil suits for the recovery of stolen funds, criminal charges for identity theft and fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, forged documents, email records. Everything was documented, dated, undeniable. My father hired a lawyer who tried to argue that he had been acting in my best interest, that the trust fund transfers were legitimate expenses for my benefit. Morgan destroyed that argument in about 15 minutes, pointing out that Chloe's private school tuition and Vivian's designer handbags were in no way related to my education or welfare. The credit card debt in my name was another major issue. Morgan worked with creditors to prove that I had not made those charges, that I had been a victim of identity theft. The process was slow and frustrating, but gradually, the fraudulent debt was being removed from my credit report. My credit score was still in shambles, but at least it was no longer actively being destroyed. Through all of this, I threw myself into my studies with a ferocity that surprised even me. Architecture became my refuge, a world where I could create beauty and order out of chaos. Professor Jenkins noticed my intensity and pulled me aside one afternoon after class. "Aurora, your designs are evolving in interesting ways," he said, spreading my latest sketches across his desk. "But I've noticed a pattern. Look at this residential design, and this community center, and this mixed-use building. What do you see?" I looked at the drawings, seeing them through his eyes. They all have protective elements, high walls with controlled entry points, interior courtyards that feel open but are actually enclosed, multiple exit routes. "You're designing for safety," he observed gently. "Not just physical safety, but emotional safety. Spaces where people can be protected but not imprisoned, where they can be seen but not exposed. It's fascinating work, Aurora, but it also tells me that you're processing something significant." I swallowed hard, surprised by how clearly my trauma was manifesting in my designs. "Is that bad?" "Bad?" He shook his head. "It's honest. Some of the most revolutionary architects in history designed from their wounds. The key is to be aware of it, to channel it intentionally rather than letting it control you. Your work has genuine power because it comes from genuine experience. That conversation shifted something in how I approached my designs. Instead of trying to hide the influence of my experiences, I leaned into it. I started designing spaces specifically for people who had been abused, abandoned, domestic violence shelters that felt like homes rather than institutions, community centers for displaced families, housing projects for young adults aging out of foster care. Each design incorporated what Professor Jenkins had identified: protective boundaries that didn't feel like cages, transparency that didn't compromise privacy, community spaces that encouraged connection without forcing it. My sustainable housing design, the one that would later be published in Sustainable Architecture Quarterly, was born from this new approach. It was a modular housing concept for young people transitioning to independence, people like me who had aged out of bad family situations and were trying to build stable lives. Each unit had its own entrance, its own secure space, but connected to shared common areas through transitional spaces that residents could control. You could be as isolated or as connected as you needed to be at any given moment. The design incorporated sustainable materials and passive solar design, making it affordable to build and maintain. It was practical, innovative, and deeply personal. When I presented it to my class, I didn't hide what had inspired it. I talked about what it felt like to live in a home where you never felt safe, never felt seen, never felt like you belonged. I talked about the importance of creating spaces that acknowledged that not everyone came from functional families, that some of us needed different kinds of support and different kinds of community. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Professor Jenkins started clapping, and the rest of the class joined in. Evan caught up with me after class. "That was incredible. You didn't just design a building, you designed hope." "That's dramatic," I said, but I was smiling. "Maybe," he agreed. "But also true. You're going to change lives with this stuff, Aurora. I really believe that." While my academic life was flourishing, the legal battle was reaching its climax. The criminal investigation into my father had expanded beyond just the theft from me. The district attorney had discovered that Richard Sterling had been engaging in fraudulent business practices for years, using my grandfather's reputation to secure contracts and then cutting corners on materials and safety standards to maximize profits. Investors were coming forward, people who had lost money in Richard's schemes. The house on Sycamore Street, my house that I had never even seen, was just one piece of a much larger pattern of deception. Vivian's carefully constructed social media narrative began to fall apart as more information became public. Her posts about family loyalty and false accusations started getting comments from people who had been burned by Richard's business dealings. "Your husband stole $50,000 from my retirement fund," one person wrote. "Maybe Aurora isn't the problem here." Vivian started deleting comments, then restricting them, then eventually made her account private entirely. The damage was done. Chloe stopped messaging me entirely. I learned through my grandfather that she had been suspended from her private school for bullying another student, something about posting cruel videos mocking a girl's financial situation. The irony was not lost on me. I wondered if Chloe was starting to understand the consequences of the poisonous values she had been raised with, or if she just felt like a victim of circumstances she couldn't control. Then came the day I had been both dreading and anticipating. Morgan called me with news. "The criminal charges against your father have been filed. The prosecution is very confident. With the evidence we have, they're expecting him to accept a plea deal. But Aurora, you should also know that Richard and Vivian have filed for bankruptcy. They're going to lose everything. Everything. The mansion on Maple Hollow, the luxury cars, the designer clothes. All of it built on a foundation of fraud and stolen money, now collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. And the house on Sycamore Street?" I asked. "That's the good news. The deed transfer has been deemed fraudulent. The property is being returned to you. You're the legal owner. What do you want to do with it? I thought about that question for a long time. I could live there, claim the space that had been stolen from me, but the house would always be tainted by the memory of betrayal. It would never feel like home. I want to sell it. I decided, I want to use the money for something good. For my education, for the sustainable housing project I designed, for building something real that helps people instead of hurting them. That's very mature of you, Morgan said approvingly. I'll start the process. The market is strong right now. You should get a good price. The house sold quickly, in less than 3 weeks. A young couple, both teachers, fell in love with the charming craftsman-style exterior and the renovated interior. They had no idea about the complicated history behind the property, the theft and forgery and family destruction it represented. To them, it was just a beautiful house in a good neighborhood where they could build their life together. The sale price was $520,000, $40,000 more than my grandfather had originally paid. When the check cleared, when I saw that money in my account, money that was truly mine, earned not through suffering but through justice, I sat in my grandfather's home office and cried. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief, of vindication, of freedom. Your mother would be proud of you, my grandfather said quietly, handing me a handkerchief. She was strong like you. She never let anyone diminish her light. I see so much of her in you, Aurora. I had few memories of my mother. She had died when She thought her value was determined by how much she could endure, how invisible she could make herself, how little space she could take up. She was wrong about all of it, and I'm grateful to her for finally reaching her breaking point, because that breaking point became my breakthrough. My father ended up accepting a plea deal, serving 2 years in a minimum security facility for fraud and identity theft. Vivian, who had cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for immunity, found work as a retail manager. Chloe finished high school, attended community college, and from what I heard through distant family members, was slowly learning about consequences and accountability. I wished them no ill will, but I also maintained firm boundaries. They were not welcome in my life. They had made their choices, and now they lived with the results. Healing wasn't linear. Some days I still woke up angry, mourning what I'd never had, seeing fathers and daughters laugh together hurt. Therapy with a trauma specialist helped. The carved box from that Christmas Eve sat on my desk, proof of how far I'd traveled. But mostly, I felt free. Free to build a life based on my own values, my own dreams, my own definition of success and family. Free to create spaces, both literal and metaphorical, where people could feel safe and seen and valued. Free to say no without guilt, to set boundaries without explanation, to prioritize my own well-being without apology. The Sycamore Street house, the one I'd never even seen, no longer haunted me. I sold it, claimed what was mine, and built something better from the ruins of their lies. Sometimes justice looks like revenge from the outside, but from the inside, from where I was standing, it just looked like finally choosing myself. That's what I learned through all of this. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You can't sacrifice your truth to maintain someone else's lies. You can't earn love from people who see you as a resource instead of a person. And when you finally stop trying, when you finally stand up and say enough, the people who truly care about you will support you. The ones who don't were never really yours to lose. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and claiming your worth? Have you ever discovered that the people you loved most were the ones hurting you the most? Drop a comment and tell me your story. Hit that like button if this resonated with you. Subscribe because I'm going to keep sharing these stories of people who found their strength in their breaking points. And remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. It's the beginning of everything good that comes after. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And you deserve better than being a ghost in your own life.